Infect against Jerry Thompson. It was his legacy loss of the morning. But one thing you have to remember is that Jerry and Tom play test together. And that's not to say that Jake Mondello is not a competent shardless bug pilot. He won the Open last week. And he's very good at it. But Infect is a strange enough deck in Legacy that there's a good chance that Jake has played less than 5 matches of this against Infect lifetime with this deck. You know, Infect is a very explosive deck that punishes missteps against it. So he's going to have to be pretty careful if this is something he's not experienced playing.
Now, one thing that, if you're Jake, if you follow the Open Series at all, you know what Tom's playing. You know exactly, if you get paired against Tom in Legacy, it's one way, and it's going to be Infect. So Tom immediately going to play for the Catacombs, get a Tropical Island, and play Glistenerel. Mondello will draw his card for the turn. Mondello's going to shuffle Tom's deck here and then move forward with his turn. A Misty Rainforest is what he will sacrifice. We'll see what land he's going to get. Both players did keep 7 cards, so Tom is already off to a nice start here, and we'll see what Mondello is up to on his first turn of the game. Feels like maybe a Death Ray Shaman.
So the difficulty in this matchup that we saw when we saw this yesterday was that the shardless bug players were basically able to play a stack of removal spells and have their win con more or less be Liliana. So once they got rid of all of Infect's creatures, they'd use Liliana to get rid of the rest of Infect's hands. And once Infect runs out of creatures and cards in hand, it's not a deck that reloads very well.
It's a Brainstorm here from Ross. You can see in his hand he has a Berserk, also has a copy of Invigorate here. There's Nickbuff next is hiding out as well. So Tom will add those 3 cards to his hand. He's got to put 2 back, and we'll figure out how he wants to order these. You also see the Mighty Viridian Corruptor in his hand right now as well. Just a 1-of in his main deck, but it actually plays a pretty important role. Some nice targets here in Baleful Strix and Shardless Agent.
So Tom, already between Berserk and Invigorate, does have a 10-point combo if he gets the opportunity to swing it in. And that's one of the powerful, really why this deck is powerful enough for Legacies, because of the interaction between Invigorate and Infect.
It's time for Ross to put 2 back. Looks a little bit unsure of himself, but now he does decide. So the Brainstorm does resolve. There is a Savannah. This is an attack.
And I like just actually how he makes this attack. You know, spends a lot of time on a Brainstorm, then just puts some cards back and immediately flicks the guy sideways. And it looks like Mondello did not block here. Maybe he did. We'll see.
I would be surprised if he didn't. Here's a Force of Will moving a Brainstorm. Tom has a Daze.
He's going to Daze the Force of Will.
Yep. And now a Berserk. Is that Dead Ski Poo?
I'm not positive that Jake blocked.
Well, if he's Berserking, he didn't block.
Yeah, no, he did.
Yeah, he did not block, and he is dead on turn 2. Tom Ross making this game and this matchup look easy. He's up a game right away.
So walking this matchup, I said, if you haven't played a lot of matches against Infect, and I'll be honest, like, I haven't. I've played against this deck, I think 0 times in Legacy. You can really get the rug pulled out from under you when you play this matchup. And I think Jake Mondello saw that there. You know, turn one Death Ray, Tom swings with Glistener Elf, you're like, all right, well, what's the worst that could happen? And the answer is, well, Tom will kill you turn 2 with counter magic backup. That's the worst.
That's the worst thing that can happen. That's pretty bad.
I mean, that's ridiculous, right? Yeah. So, Infect is very punishing on a misstep, and just a slight miscalculation there cost Jake the entire game.
Well, Mondello's sideboard is where we are heading right now. He's got an additional copy of him to Torak to go along with the couple he has in his main deck. 2 Golgari Charms, 2 Thoughtseize, 2 copies of Nile Spellbound, 2 Disfigures, 2 Flusterstorms, a Force of Will, 2 copies of Chill, and a Toxic Deluge. He's got beautiful options here. Charm is great against the all 1/1 creature deck. Thoughtseize is very good against this deck to just really break up what they are trying to set up. Disfigure as well, really good at killing these creatures if Tom doesn't have a pump spell or a Vines of the Vastwood. So I imagine, again, that this matchup is relatively good for Jake, but the point that you're kind of driving home here is the important one where, you know, Tom and Jerry probably tested this matchup some while they were testing Roanoke this weekend, but by and large, when you play against Infect and Tom Ross playing it, this is the first time you played against this deck. I can't imagine a lot of people test their deck against Infect.
Well, if you want to test against Infect, first of all, you have to find someone that plays Infect, which right now, at least on the Open Series, that's one guy. So if you don't know Tom Ross, you know, you'd have to proxy up the deck. You'd have to find someone who knows how to play it. There's a lot of hoops to go through if you wanted to play test this matchup. that probably you will never face. So I think there's like good reasons that you wouldn't have played it much.
What does Ross have on his side of things?
All right, so we looked at this last time. It can be a pretty difficult matchup for Ross. We saw in the match against Jerry that a lot of times his creatures were susceptible to just a stack of removal spells. So we found that what he wanted to do in the sideboard was just board in more creatures and more way to find additional creatures. So he has 2 Necropedes if he needs more creatures. He also has a Sylvan Library to help him restock after Jake kills all his things. But really the game plan in this matchup is what you saw right there. Tom doesn't want these games to go long at all.
The longer it gets, the worse it gets, right?
Yeah, I think there's some matchups because, so Infect does this great thing where it actually chips at people and doesn't use its pump spells. It forces its opponent to leave up a lot of mana to answer a possible pump spell, but then Tom never actually uses it. So you'll see him swinging like for 1, and then 1, and then 1. His opponent can't play anything, so they have to leave up 4 mana or something to not die. In this matchup, so like you can do that, for example, against, say, a Stoneblade deck. You know, you can go long because you just tie up all their mana every turn. In this matchup, because Charlotte has so much removal, Tom can't do that. He can't do this chipping away strategy. I think he wants to combo kill as quickly as possible here.
As these players do finish up sideboarding for what is a relatively complex matchup, we will talk about our dual Open Series weekend that is happening actually sooner than you think, honestly. September 27th and 28th, you and Patrick Sullivan will be bringing the fun from New Jersey.
Yeah, so this is our first double Open Series weekend. So there's an Open Series in both New Jersey and Indianapolis that weekend. But you're right, we'll be covering on SCG Live the Open from New Jersey. But if New Jersey's far for you, if you're in the Midwest, we'll also have an Open Series in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this weekend. It's the first time that we've ever done a double Open Series weekend before. If it goes well, I think there's a chance that we do it again. And we can't forget that this is the first weekend with Cons of Tark here in Standard. So again, Return to Ravnica and friends are leaving. Cons is coming in. And this is the opportunity for you as a player to make your mark on the weekend at one of these Open Series events. I'm looking forward to all of the results from this tournament, from these 2 tournaments, excuse me, where, you know, we're going to have deck lists just pouring in. A lot of innovation, I imagine, and everyone's, you know, attention is going to be on these 2 tournaments and see what wins, what makes the top 16, what performs well, what are, you know, the top players playing, and what does Cons change in our Standard format.
I mean, it's always interesting to see what happens on the first weekend, right? If you go back to the first Opens that we played a year ago when Theros Block came out, it's not at all what the metagame ended up looking like.
Absolutely.
You know, we had mono red Devotion aggro winning. I think there were 2 Naya mid-range decks in the top 8. You know, these are things you don't really see in your top 8s at all anymore.
Those decks are long gone.
Yeah, White Weenie was one of the top decks. That one actually has somewhat stayed around.
Yeah, it hasn't really gotten the footing that I think a lot of people had expected or hoped. You know, green-white kind of started off really well, and then it ended up being really bad. Now it's all of a sudden really good again in Standard. So those things changed. I mean, Mono Blue Devotion wasn't anything. You know, we didn't see that until the Pro Tour in Dublin. So, you know, that first week where people get the opportunity to brew and innovate and try these new cards out, you know, anything is viable. If you have a good idea, you test it, you play it, and you see what happens.
Yeah, Mono Black it took until after the Pro Tour for that deck to catch on.
Yeah. No one knew that Pack Rat was going to be that good, and it ended up being great. So game number 2 here between Mondello and Ross. Mondello is going to start with a Deathrite Shaman off of Bayou. We'll see if Ross wants to counter this. Looks like he is looking at a Force of Will. Maybe he wants to slow Mondello down a little bit, as he does bring Force of Will to the front of his hand.
Yeah, well, he has a pair of Force of Wills in hand. I was wondering if he was going to play Force of Will, pitching Force of Will. Here he's going to actually pitch the Blighted Agent, however.
Now that is an interesting discard. To me, that probably means that Tom has, you know, something like an Inkmoth Nexus in his hand that he is happy to try to win the game with. You know, the creatures actually for Ross aren't as good because he was playing against a deck with Abrupt Decay. So that's where things get a little bit difficult.
Yeah, I am interested to see him pitch away a creature like Blighted Agent here because his creatures are at such a premium in this matchup. Jake has a lot of removal, and there's a real concern that Jake will just kill all of Tom's things.
Verdant Catacombs will bring Ross down to 18. Tropical Island is the land he does search up, and now there is a Noble Hierarch. You can see in his hand he does have a copy of Sylvan Library as well to work himself into the mid-game with, as Mondello will draw a card. Now, I do kind of like Ross's approach here. This deck, at times, Shardless Bug can rely on Deathrite Shaman to provide its mana, and Ross is basically saying, well, I'm going to try to get you.
Yeah, well, Jake isn't opening here for him to Turok because Tom's one-drop wasn't Glistener Elf, it was Noble Hierarch, this is a pretty reasonable play to go for. And he's going to get 2 cards from Tom. Granted, they're not at random, but Tom has to burn off a second Forcible.
I think part of the reason Tom does that is because he wants to protect the Sylvan Library in his hand. That's his big plan, is to get that thing into play. Now, his draw for the turn was a copy of Dryad Arbor.
Yeah, he has Dryad Arbor, Glistener Elf, and Sylvan Library. If Dryad Arbor has Summoning Sickness, he's not going to be able to play all 3 of these this turn.
But I do believe that the library is probably the more important of the 2 cards, and he will deploy that. You see Mondello does have a copy of Liliana the Veil in his hand, and he's going to go with a Baleful Strix, so that will draw a card.
And this is what we saw in the match between Thompson and Ross yesterday, is that the cards that seemed to really hurt the Infect deck were Baleful Strix and Liliana of the Veil. Both of those are in Mondello's hand this game, so we're going to see whether or not Ross can put together an attack that gets around them.
Ross will activate the library. Take a look at a couple of cards here, see if he wants to pay 4 life to draw one of them. And it looks like he has interest in doing that, maybe. Inkmoth Nexus, a Misty Rainforest, and a Forest are the cards that he is looking at here with the Sylvan Library. Of course, you're going to get one of those no matter what for your draw for the turn, but you can pay 4 life via Sylvan Library to be able to get another card.
He certainly doesn't ever want to draw this Forest, so he wants to make sure that this fetch land cracks before drawing Forest. But he also wants to get the Inkmoth down as soon as possible, so not certain which one he wants to do. It looks like he paid for to take both the non-forest lands.
The Baleful Strix will get in front of the Dryad Arbor. There's an Inkmoth Nexus and a Glistener out before Ross does pass the turn back.
I think if you're Ross, you have to be ecstatic that you just traded a Dryad Arbor for that Baleful Strix.
I don't think I could be happier if I was Tom.
That creature, you got to trade it for a creature that didn't matter, which, I mean, the Baleful Strix, you don't have removal. It's going to trade with something eventually. Your removal spell for it is to swing into it.
Mondello does have a 4th land to play, it looks like, but he actually was going to play a copy of Toxic Deluge, and maybe this is the reason for the block.
Yeah, Toxic Deluge is going to be very good here. Just for 1 mana, it goes and takes care of Noble Hierarch and Glistener Elf. But Ross does have that Inkmoth. Let's see what he can do with it. And the answer looks like not much. His top 3 cards are another elf and 2 lands. So there's no Invigorate Berserk coming on here.
Ross going to fire up the Inkmoth Nexus. 1 Infect will be dealt to Mondello. And so Tom, ever the gentleman, willing to get out his Infect counter to keep track here on Jake. And he will sacrifice the Misty Rainforest, search up a land, we'll deploy the Glistener Elf in just a moment, and then pass the turn back.
Yeah, so do you think he just has 1 in his box he puts a die in, or does he have 10 of them in his
I
box?
imagine he just has 1. This isn't the first time I've seen him do this before. I wish he just had 10 to just throw at his opponents.
I would just put 10 there.
Yeah.
So if you had 10 and you did that turn 2 kill, where you got him in 1 turn, would you just like take 10 of them out of your box and hand them all to your opponent at once?
Yeah, here you
go.
go.
Here you go, have 10.
Yeah. Yeah. These are yours. I need those back now because you're dead. Yeah. Here's a Liliana. That will take care of the
That seems less than
Glistener Elf.
sporting.
You know, one could argue. One could definitely argue it's less than sporting, as Ross is going to take a look again with the library.
So,
Inkmoth Nexus to Spell Pierce and a Tropical Island.
I had someone ask that as so you know, there's like, hey, what do you think about making your token be the Deceiver Exarch token? And I was like,
ooh.
What? So I was like, so I'd carry 50 of them in my box, and when I won a game, I would take them all, show them to my opponent, and then we go to the next game.
I love it.
Because you never actually make Deceiver Exarchs.
No, never. Never. That's not a thing that happens. Ross actually paid 4 life yet again. He added a Spell Pierce, and now here's a Thought Seize. And you know, I think you just let that resolve. Yeah, it takes the Spell Pierce, so he ends up taking 2, does Mondello. And now there's just a land and passing the turn back over to Ross, who's going to use the library again here. A Ponder, a Blighted Agent, and a Tropical Island.
One thing we saw in the match between Thompson and Ross that actually ended up mattering was the card Creeping Tar Pit. And that's because Tom Ross's deck, between cards like Sylvan Library, Jataxian Probe, and Force of Will and Fetchlands, actually does a fair amount of damage to itself. We saw a game there where Tom actually got through Jerry's wall of removal, but then couldn't race Jerry's creatures. Tom's creatures are notoriously bad at blocking. So I'm looking actually at a situation here that seems to be setting up the same way. If you see both the Charlotte's Agent and the Creeping Tar Pit with Jake, that's 5 damage. He actually has Tom on a 2-turn clock, which is a faster clock than Tom currently has Jake on.
Tom needs to find a card like Finds of the Vastwood or Invigorate to speed things up.
because of that, I feel like we're going to see Tom ponder here.
Wouldn't surprise me. I mean, Tom has put himself, you know, kind of into this trouble on his own, right? You know, he's the one that's drawing the cards at the library. He's paid 8 life to draw cards.
Right. He
So,
could
you know,
be
that
at
was
16.
up to him. Yeah, that was up to him. But you can understand where he was trying to get to. Further the game along, try to get Jake dead before he got himself into the later game, which does favor Mondello.
But I feel like he's going to have to draw 1 or maybe 2 pump spells here to win this race. And the only way he's going to find a pump spell is by pondering. He could keep Blighted Agent as a chump blocker. But that's less than appealing. That doesn't work. And if Mondello has any removal spell, then that line doesn't work.
Ross is going to fire up these 2 copies of Inkmoth Nexus, come across here, put Mondello up to 3 Infect, and just pass the turn back. Tom's draw was an interesting one that turn. I believe he just drew a land and moved forward accordingly.
I'm
maybe
curious
trying to set him up. Maybe.
I want to know the line that Tom has him on. So right now, Tom doesn't have a pump spell and would have to draw a pump spell. But even then, a free pump spell only puts Mondello to 9 poison, even if it's an Invigorate. So it looks like he's still 1 short right now.
Charlotte's Agent will cast the Thoughtseize. Yeah, he took a Trop. It's interesting.
Didn't play the drop either.
Yeah. Another Tar Pit's going to come into play. Here's an attack for 2. Ross going to go down to 6. Mondello will pass the turn back. 2 and 3 cards. So Tom is looking at.
Yeah. The new card off his Sylvan Library was a Glistener Elf. So he has actually a lot of Infect creatures right now, but does not have too many ways to pump them.
Here's a Ponder. That will resolve. 2 and 3. Third card's a Pendelhaven. That's not the most helpful. Not terrible.
It might be good enough here. So Pendelhaven allows him to, well, he's actually mana short, but he can start attacking with 1 Inkmoth and then blocking with another one. It at best buys him a turn.
But he's going to shuffle this away. Not happy with what he sees. So a mystery card is coming.
So Ross, what I think he's going to need is a pair of pump spells, and he needs to couple it with a chump block this coming turn. So there are a lot of things that have to go his way right now.
Well, let's see what the mystery card is first. Inside the mystery box is a Misty Rainforest. Not what Tom was probably looking for.
Yeah, another land has got to be low on the list of things he wants.
Up to 4 Infect. There's a land, pass it back.
So he's going to have to chump with the Inkmoth this turn, which means that his swing plus an Invigorate only puts Jake to 9 Infect. Tom's top deck is going to have to involve a Brainstorm then, because he needs 2 pieces.
That, or he needs Mondello to not get horribly aggressive. Here's a Thoughtseize. Another land. So the coast is clear for Mondello to do things.
Yeah, Mondello has a pair of Tarmogoyfs, so right now, doesn't have any interaction with Inkmoth. His best interaction, I think, is to just try to kill Tom.
Yeah, Tar Pit it up.
Yeah.
You see, he's thinking about it.
Right, a Tar Pit here forces Tom to chump with Inkmoth, which is really a great spot for Mondello.
There it is. Now he's going to come in. Very quick block. Ross is going to go down to 1.
Yeah, takes 3 and 2. Down to 1 here. So Tom's going to have to brainstorm and find 2 things. There is a brainstorm.
Yeah.
The other cards are brainstorm and Jataxi and probe. So none of, like, he needs to find double pump spell, and this isn't going to work because he can't crack that fetch land to reset.
Yep.
I don't think, because there's only going to be 1 new card that Tom will see here, I don't think he has a line that works.
I think he's coming to that conclusion right now. It's just sort of doing the math. He's going to draw a card. He's going to cast Jataxi and probe. Probably wants to get information on what Mondello has, which is 2 Tarmogoyfs. He will draw the copy of Brainstorm, cast the Brainstorm.
It gets him 1 card deeper, so if he finds Invigorate in those cards, then he would get it. He's playing to some pretty narrow outs. he didn't find either of his pump spells, so we'll be going to game 3.
Jake Mondello does win game number 2. Shardless Bug versus Infect heading to a 3rd game. Jake got to play more than one turn that game. Congratulations to him.
Yeah, we had a game was slightly longer.
Yeah, and I do think that things do favor Mondello in a big way if that's what happens. I really, really do. Longer game just seems great for him. But again, you can kind of see the difference. You know, we saw in that game where Mondello traded his Baleful Strix for a Dryad Arbor. Now, that's a trade that is very favorable for Tom. You know, and it might seem like on the surface that it's favorable for Jake because, again, I'm killing one of your lands, killing one of your creatures, and, you know, I've already drawn a card off of that. But, you know, Baleful Strix is pretty reserved for just blocking an Infect creature.
Well, yeah, one thing we saw in the match with Jerry is he paid a lot of respect to Inkmoth Nexus. He had a brainstorm play when he's playing Shardless Bug where he had the option of taking some real cards versus just finding additional wastelands. And this was before Tom even had an Inkmoth in play. And Jerry opted to just start stocking up on wastelands, kind of acknowledging that Inkmoth may be the scariest card out of Tom's deck.
So we'll see what's going to happen here between both players as they do sideboard back and forth a little bit. Again, Ross is going to be on the play, and he was our Season 2 Invitational Champion. So he's qualified for our Players' Championship. And he didn't just win that tournament. He crushed it. Taking down everyone with Boss Sly and Infect. You know, Boss Sly really putting those red decks on the map. Now he's moved over to Rabble Red, which is what he's playing in this tournament. I was a little surprised to see him playing that, given that, you know, the last couple of tournaments haven't gone great for Tom when playing Rabble Red. He, you know, was in DC, didn't have a great finish there. But he said, you know, I'm just going to play what I know, and hopefully it works out.
One thing when you're playing these really low curve decks is that you can spike a tournament where the metagame is just great for you. And I think Tom really hit that at the Invitational. In the top 8 rounds, he dropped 1 game.
Yeah.
And I remember he had a quarterfinals match against Brad Nelson and a semifinals match against Alex Bertoncini, who were both playing Jund Monsters at the time, which both matches were comically not close.
Tom crushed them both.
Yeah, and then there were things where I remember as soon as turn 3, you would look at the board and you're just thinking, I don't see how the Jund Monsters player could win from this state, even if he got to pick his draws. And this is turn 3, you know, this is very quick in the game.
Yeah. No, that deck was well positioned. He picked 2 great decks for that tournament. Of course, he's got extensive knowledge on how to play both. You know, he's really doing the same thing this particular weekend, and he is off to a 7-2 start. His losses yesterday to 2 fantastic players, Jerry Thompson in the legacy portion, and then Shaheen Sarani in the standard portion. So, you know, he's lost to 2 great players playing decks that they know how to play in Shardless Bug and Esper, and Tom is playing decks that he knows how to play. So we'll see if he can move forward again. He's top-8'd both Invitationals this year. It would be one heck of a run if he top-8'd all 3. That'd be insane.
Yeah, that would certainly be an impressive thing to add. Remember, Tom Ross is 6th currently in our current seasonal standings.
Yeah. And again, even though he's qualified, I mean, it's still impressive nonetheless, even though, you know, he doesn't really get to travel as much as a lot of the other players do. So, you know, his standing is very, very impressive. Don't want to take away anything from Jake Mondello as well. I mean, he's just coming off of a Legacy Open win last weekend in DC, a very impressive one with Shardless Bug.
Yeah, as you said there, Tom Ross plays significantly fewer events than most of the players here. So to be the overall sixth place person in the standings with the number of events he played really shows that he may have the highest, I would say, average finish of any of the players currently on the leaderboard.
That's certainly possible. You know, I believe that between Lloyd Kerr's win in Baltimore and Mondello's win last week, and we don't want to forget about James Wynn winning in Portland as well, that might be the big reason that Shardless Bug is kind of all over the place this particular weekend. You know, Jerry Thompson's playing that deck. Not much of a surprise there. Mondello's running it back this weekend. A bevy of other players out there playing Shardless Bug. It looks very, very well positioned on the weekend. A lot of the players that are playing it have been doing very well in the legacy portion of the tournament. Their standard records are what they are. You know, Thompson yesterday did go 1-3 in the standard portion, but he did go 4-0 with Shardless Bug in the legacy portion. So interesting to watch how Shardless does perform. And unfortunately for us, we are able to, you know, break it down by format on what the results are at the end of the weekend.
There just isn't a lot of combo right now in Legacy being played. And we've seen that in our top 8s of the Opens over this last month. There's typically been between 0 and 2 combo decks in all of our top 8s.
It's a little surprising to me that there's so little combo. I mean, you think of Legacy as kind of a, you know, a hectic place where you can play combo decks and just destroy everyone, be it with Storm, you know, be it with Belcher or Oopsaw Spells or Dredge or whatever. And those decks have not been performing very well.
I mean, I think a lot of this is due to just recent releases of cards. Combo has gotten notoriously few tools, I would say, in the last 3 years. Like, possibly the best card they've gotten is Swan Song.
Sure.
You know, as a great offensive one-mana counterspell. But the combo decks have really not changed much. You know, you look at Sneak and Show, the newest card in the deck is, I believe, Emrakul. Or Gristlebrand. The monsters are the newest thing, but the deck, those pieces aren't getting any better. Whereas if you look at a deck like Shardless Bug, you know, they've gotten to add Toxic Deluge, Deathrite Shaman, Abrupt Decay, Shardless Agent. These are all cards that are newer than Gristlebrand.
All very powerful.
Right, so these things have really, they've gone up in power, whereas I don't think Combo's getting new tools right now.
Well, it is dangerous to give Combo new tools as well. You know, that's a real concern,
That's
right?
kind of, when you give Combo really good cards, it's kind of a Pandora's box going on. You know, like, once you print a really good one-mana cantrip, there's no coming back from that one.
Yeah.
Combo's just going to be good because you did that.
And they also had, you know, take cards out of the format. I know Mystical Tutor hasn't been banned recently, but it's been gone for a while, and that's it's probably for the best. I wouldn't
mind seeing it come back at this point.
That's a dangerous card to have around.
I think the fair decks are up to the challenge now.
Tom going to sacrifice the Misty Rainforest. Tropical Island's land will search out. And we'll see if he wants to start with Noble Hierarch, maybe a Glistener Elf, or perhaps a little cantrip action.
On the play, his deck can just be very scary to play against.
It will be a Noble Hierarch. Mondello will draw a card for the turn. He's got a couple of fetch lands. He'll sacrifice a Verdant Catacombs and go down to 19 as well. We'll see what land he wants to search up and what his first play will be.
Well, Mondello's going to be pretty certain that he's going to live past turn 2 this game.
This
because
time.
It's not a Glistener Elf. But I actually found playing against Infect that the turn 1 Noble Hierarch starts, to me, are scarier than the turn 1 Glistener Elf starts.
And that's actually really surprising, but I agree with you. You know,
the ideal one drop.
Yeah, it's Hierarch, I feel like, a high percentage of the time.
You wouldn't think that the ideal one-drop in an Infect deck would be a creature that does not have Infect.
It's a Zaxian Probe, we will see. A Deathrite Shaman, a Shardless Agent, a Tarmogoyf, Liliana Veil, Creeping Tar Pit, and another Verdant Catacombs here from Mondello. So Ross will record that information. We'll draw a card from his deck, and we'll see how he wants to move forward after that.
This is a pretty good start here for Mondello. He's threatening a turn 2 Liliana of the Veil. And as we saw before, Liliana is one of the best weapons for the Shardless Bug deck. And I might even, it's either Liliana or Baleful Strix. Those are the two real money cards here. But Liliana, both of its abilities are real bad news for Infect.
You want to talk about money cards? Inkmoth Nexus might be the best one in the deck for Tom in this matchup. Blighted Agent as well. So now Liliana actually looks a lot worse because if it does come down, it's probably going to gobble up a Noble Hierarch, which Tom won't mind.
Yeah, we did see a lot of tools in Mondello's hand, but right now he has no way to answer an Inkmoth Nexus. His only answer to it is a Liliana Ultimate. So that in conjunction with Blighted Agent really threatens him. Even though the Shardless Bug deck has a lot of removal, where Infect gets its points is that Infect tries to win before Jake could cast all those cards. You know, if you're taking, you have to worry, there's 2 points of Infect on the board that you can't block. Well, that's two pump spells from dead right now. If you were to kill nothing this turn, Tom could simply play a land, activate Inkmoth, go Vines, Invigorate, and kill you.
This time for a Shardless Agent. So Mondello's going to try to hit something spicy with this Cascade. And he's going to find Ancestral Visions. That's not so bad. However, that will get Spell Pierced.
Yeah, usually Visions there is just the best thing to Cascade into. Would be good there. I mean, it's always really good. But it's not one of the best times to draw more cards. Jake actually has most of his deck's weapons.
Ross draws his card for the turn. He will attack with Blighted Agent. Exalted Trigger will make it so the 2 Infect heads Mondello's way. However, I don't think Ross's hand is all that great. You can see he's got a lot of lands over there and not much else. So Mondello's going to draw a card. It's a copy of Hymn to Torak. And he might lead out with that one. If that's the case, Tom probably doesn't mind all that much.
If I'm in Mondello's shoes, I think it's hard to not get Liliana down as soon as I can. Hymn's a really tempting play, but you're getting close to being dead to 1 pump spell. Remember, all the pump spells are +4s. So as soon as you get to 4 Infect on this board, 1 pump spell does it.
Ross gonna let that Hymn resolve. Wants to show a little bit of strength as though his hand is solid, but it's not very good right now. So that's the card he gets to keep. He'll discard those 2 lands, and I believe he'll keep 1 land here. Creeping Tar Pit will come into play there for Mondello. And Deathrite will add a mana to play another Deathrite and pass the turn back over to Ross, whose last card is a Misty Rainforest. So Ross will draw a card. Did not get a great look at that one.
I believe it was either a land or a Vines of Vastwood. Obviously, those are two really different draws.
And it was a Vines. Good eye, Sniper.
So that's one of the +4s we talked about here. I'll be interested to see whether or not Tom just fires it off immediately and puts Jake to 8 infect.
I personally like that play, and he's going to make that play. So +4/+4. You throw in the Exalted and the 1 power. That'll be 6. That'll put Mondello up to 8 infect, because the card that's so difficult for Mondello to beat aren't the creatures on the table. It's that land back there in Inkmoth Nexus.
Well, now Mondello has to have 2 removal spells, because between Inkmoth Nexus, Blighted Agent, and Noble Hierarch, if you leave any 2 of them alive, it's 2 points of infect damage. So suddenly that 1 Liliana isn't enough. And I think he may have actually just gotten Jake with that play.
Yeah.
I don't believe Jake can kill 2 creatures. He can't block either of the attackers. I think whichever one he leaves Tom with will get him.
Mondello is going to deploy a Liliana. He will minus that. And I wouldn't be surprised at all, yeah, if Tom immediately sacrifices that fetch land. This is kind of what Dryad Arbor is in the deck for.
Yeah, Dryad Arbor. We've seen this in a lot of these all-in combo decks. Was it in Modern Boggles makes the same play, actually, where you can fetch for Dryad Arbor as insurance against Liliana of the Veil. And even if Liliana had hit a creature there, I think Mondello is still dead. But now that it didn't, I think Mondello is certainly dead.
Ross will draw a card. He'll fire up and bash in here with both.
Yeah, he's swinging 2 to be safe to a removal spell. He doesn't want to try to exalt one of them. Heads up play here, and I think there is a kill spell.
And he says, I'm going right towards you. Mondello will look at his hand, and he will
doesn't have it.
extend it. Tom Ross going to win this match over Jake Mondello. 2-1. And the boss is able to get by Shardless Bug and move on to 8-2.
Yeah, really well sequenced there by Ross. It shows a lot of education on his deck. I think if you're in Mondello's spot, this was a matchup that it was possible to win. Now, Tom had some pretty good draws. You don't always get to, Tom got to turn 2 kill him, and that is, it's very possible that you just can't do anything against those good draws. But certainly, I think he was a little bit blindsided on this match.
I think, this is kind of shows, what we talked about right at the start, is what is Mondello's familiarity with the matchup. You saw that Thompson